episode 480 of Retro Encounter, RPG fans' bi-weekly podcast of many topics, usually of the retro variety. And I will be your host today, Zach Wilkerson. And we are here today to discuss the second half, or really the story of The Blazing Blade. We'll talk, of course, a little bit about some of the endgame maps, some stuff that drove me absolutely insane. But before we get to my insanity, let's talk about the three insane people who are here to join me, starting with you, Lucas.
I definitely feel like insane is an appropriate descriptor after playing that game.
Absolutely. And Ben.
Yeah, I'm excited.
And Audra Bowling.
Hello.
Hello.
And I miss Sacred Stone's quality of life stuff.
Yeah, we'll get to that too, for sure. Yeah, I'm excited to play Sacred Stones now with hearing about some of the quality of life stuff that is missing in this game. So last time we talked a lot, and I mean a lot because I edited the episode, so I've listened to it. We talked a lot about the gameplay stuff, and we're certainly going to still dig into that. But I do feel like even though I find the story, at least what is easily accessible in the story of the Blazing Blade, to be disappointing, mediocre, bland, all those words. I know there are some things in the story that are not as easily accessible that are really cool, but I also think that we need to talk about it a little bit, sort of in general. So I think last time, or correct me if I'm wrong about this, panelists, we talked about Lynn's story, but not really anything after that, right? Is that what happened?
We talked a little bit about the Elliowood story, just like the initial, part, basically up until you get to the Dragon's Gate. Though I don't think we went into like great detail about any of the events.
That sounds about right. I mean, so just for, I guess, a quick recap, when we flash forward, what is it? It's a year, it's 3 years, right?
No, it's a year. It's about a year, yeah.
After Lynn's story, and we go meet Elliowood, who was part of Lynn's story as well, very briefly towards the end. And he is the prince of, I can't remember what's the name of the area.
Foray. Yeah.
And his dad, who obviously is in charge of that place, goes missing. So then Elliowood moves to go find him. Very quickly, his friend Hector joins you, which is awesome because Hector is cool. Elliowood is not. And it turns out that it's this group called the Black Fang that has kidnapped him, and this group works for Nurgle, if I remember right, who is trying to open the gate to the dragons so that Nurgle can sort of take possession of the dragons to world dominate, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong about any of these details here.
No, I mean, that's like the general consent.
Yeah.
And he spreads chaos throughout the land.
Yeah, there's more to it than that, but we'll get into that later.
Yeah, well, I mean, we can get into it now. I mean, might as well. I mean, because as I said from the top, for me, the story not super memorable, but I know for you, Ben, and for some others, maybe there were some story beats that you found a little more interesting than I did.
Yeah, I mean, I think it gets more interesting further in the game, and it's a lot more. I mean, I think I talked about this a little bit in the last episode, but this game has the problem of being a prequel. So the events of this game can't be too impactful to the overall world state because it has to lead directly into the Binding Blade, which happens about 10 years after. So there's they're limited in what the stakes or whatever. So I think that's part of why a lot of the story is them kind of moving around behind the scenes, and there are events that are affecting different countries or different major players, but none of it is really coming to a head in a world or a continent wide war or anything, which would be the typical setting for a Fire Emblem game. And that's because they're kind of more setting the stage for those events that will happen in the Binding Blade. And then also a lot of it is very lore focused. So more background on the world, more background on the Scouring and the kind of the seven heroes who formed all the countries in the continent and all that. And so I think part of it too is that the story is the plot is kind of caught between these two things. Okay, how do we lead into the events of the Binding Blade, but then how do we also tell all this backstory and lore of the world and flesh out the world And those two things are sometimes coexist well, and then sometimes they're kind of at odds with one another. And so
Yeah.
that also kind of creates a situation where the plot is jumping around a lot. The characters are moving around various countries very quickly, and they're just kind of moving around all over the place. And you don't have that kind of steady progression that you would typically have
Yeah.
in a Fire Emblem story, which is kind of a major flaw with the plot, I would say.
I feel like that's a really good. I hadn't thought of it that way, and that's a really good way to put it. And I feel like the fact that it does focus so much on the past and the future kind of means that the present seems less impactful and interesting as a result. Because one of the things that Zach kind of referenced and that you've pointed out as well is that there is a lot of cool stuff, but a lot of it's buried in like support conversations where you find out about the secret pasts and stuff like that, and it's like, okay, that's great, but why do I care now?
Yeah. I mean, it also seems like it's a game that wants to be about its characters. You know what I mean? But because it has a lot of really cool characters, and I think that is a strength of the game. I think that Hector is great. I think that even like the introduction to a lot of the characters, because I feel like I didn't get to know them very well after their introduction because of the way that characters are characterized, and also because of permadeath and things like that. Like Raven and Lucius's introduction, when you're sort of like breaking them out, and it seems like they have like this really interesting past and this really interesting history, and I'm like, okay, I'm immediately invested in who these characters are. And then, even despite the fact that I used both of those characters for pretty much the rest of the game, I then learned basically nothing about the rest of their story. But then, in sort of reading about it and talking to Ben, like, they have a really interesting backstory.
They're one of my favorite supports.
I think, I mean, that in some ways, the character writing is very strong because there is a lot of that depth to these characters that, like, frankly, have very little relevance to the plot at all, like pretty much none, right? But they still took the time to like invest in all this backstory and kind of character interactions. But of course, all of that is behind the supports. So if you're not seeing the supports, then you're not seeing really any of that, and it just feels like you get these characters and then they just drop off the face of the world as far as the main story is concerned. And yeah, that's just a big problem, I think, with the main story, and why the story is not really that compelling, because all the compelling stuff is the character interactions, which the story just doesn't really focus on beyond Hector and Eliwood and Lynn.
The other piece that so sports are one, the other one is the boss dialogue, which is to me even like, I love the fact that it takes the time that's like, if you attack like a boss with somebody who was like one of their former subordinates or has a relationship to them, you get dialogue. You have this little back and forth between them, or if they have like a past of any other sort. And like going into the final like the second to last chapter, the last chapter, whatever it is, the first part of the last chapter, where they have like all the resurrected villains.
Yeah.
Going through, and since I knew about it at that point, I was trying to like coordinate it to be like, okay, Nino needs to hit like all
that
of
was
these
so hard
people.
for me. I could never. I was just trying to get through it alive. Good for you.
That's what bolting is for. She doesn't need to be anywhere near them.
But yeah, I agree, Lucas. Like you're talking about where you can have like Nino, because she has this personal connection to all these Black Fang members, and then another character where that's true, who has dialogue with all of them, is Legal, because he was a member of the Black Fang. So if you have them, fight any of the kind of resurrected corpses of the Black Fang leaders, then they have like interesting dialogue and unique dialogue to each of the characters, which is really cool. But again, is something that's very like optional, and that a lot of people maybe aren't going to realize. And that's just kind of the nature of this game in a lot of ways, right? Like a lot of that storytelling is optional and, put behind some pretty arduous requirements to see. And even some of the really interesting parts of like the main story. Like basically, almost all of Nurgle's motivations are also kind of hidden behind the side chapters, the guidance chapters.
Oh yeah.
Many of which are exclusive to Hector's story. So you're also not really getting. I mean, from if you just do the initial playthrough of Eliwood's story, then it's like, oh, Nurgle's just like a crazy evil guy who wants to dominate the world. And that, if once you get that kind of more that background from some of the side chapters, it's like, oh, there are actually more complicated character motivations behind this. But that is, something most players are not going to see. So that is a flaw too in the storytelling. Like it's cool to give
I mean, I'm
like
curious, what are his motivations?
okay, yeah. So I mean, I can get into that. So
yeah, go ahead.
so we talked, I think, both previously about the first chapter you get with Kashuna, the magic seal. So if you in Hector's mode, if you do defeat him on that map that he first appears in, then you get an additional guidance chapter after that. And so in that chapter, there are some scenes where essentially Nurgle like returns to that part of the Dragon's Gate and has some like flashbacks. And uh, essentially, Nurgle is the father of Ninian and Nils. So when and there's also this is also like a translation issue. So when you fight Nurgle at the end and you defeat him, his death quote, he's like kind of trailing off and he says like quintessence, and that's actually a mistranslation. What he's supposed to be saying is Aenir, and Aenir is the mother of Ninian and Nils. So essentially what he was trying to do at first is his goal with like creating the morphs, harvesting the quintessence, all of that was actually related to trying to bring back his wife Aenir, who was a dragon, and him trying to open the Dragon's Gate was him trying to bring Ninian and Nils back, because part of why they went through the Dragon's Gate in the first place is that Aenir was taken, either kidnapped or killed, or it's not 100% clear what happened. And Nurgle, left them at the Dragon's Gate and said, if I don't come back in 10 days, then you need to go through the gate. And this is all revealed in this like kind of side chapter back story. And he didn't show up, so they went through the Dragon's Gate. And then losing them and losing Aenir is kind of what caused him to devote himself to like this study of dark magic, to the harvesting of life essence, and to try and harvest all this power so he can open the gate, is actually to bring Ninian and Nils back. But by the time he gathers the power to be able to do that and call them back to the gate, the corrupting influence of the dark magic has just completely he's totally consumed by it. So he does not, and he no longer remembers that was his goal. So he doesn't even remember who they are. So when he calls them back to the gate, he doesn't know that they're his children, and they don't realize he's their father because he's so physically corrupted, and it's been so long they don't recognize him. So not that makes the story like amazing or anything.
You actually just described something that is significantly more interesting than anything I saw in my 22 hours of playing this game. I mean, that kind of drives me crazy. Go ahead, Audra. I'm sorry.
I guess it's a way to encourage replayability.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see that, but I think that there's a limitation to that.
Yes.
And I think that they take about 7 steps over that line with the way because I think that, we forget, and maybe it's partially on me, like, there are all these, like, I think about like Final Fantasy VI, for example, a game that I think all of us have played. I know Ben and Lucas, we talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And there are all these like little tiny, like little hidden things, right? And like some of them are really, really cool. Like the stuff with like Gao's dad, or the stuff with like Shadow and Realm. Really cool. Not to spoil anything. Those of you who haven't played Final Fantasy VI, which is what's wrong with you, go play that game. Anyway, but like the story itself is still really compelling, and you still get like the vast majority of what you need. Whereas here, you might want to replay the game, but like I'm not gonna like how many times would you have to replay this game, and how guide heavy would you have to be to even get to the thing that you're describing right now? And I'm like, dang, dude, that's like a lot. And like, especially, I'll admit that maybe 23 years later, like I'm not going to replay a game like 7 times to try to get to all these things. But when I was a kid on the GBA, maybe I would have. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think Audra, you're right. Like the idea was to have really interesting things to encourage replayability, but Zach, I think you're right as well. Like they went too far with that.
Hmm.
It's okay for some of the support conversations and the side characters like information to be more hidden or something that you have to work for because it's not integral to understanding the main plot. But to hide all this information about Nurgle behind like what is very difficult requirements to and multiple playthroughs is just because he has no understandable character motivation without that. And that's a major flaw because then you're just like, oh, this is just like a generic evil guy villain, and there is more to him than that, but you're just not going to get it unless you replay the game like at least 3 times. And um I mean, it's just not. Most people are not going to do that. They're not going to see it, and so they get this impression of the story, and it is kind of a disservice to the player in some ways to hide something so important behind such a
I think it's a
such.
disservice to the writers, to the
Yeah,
localizers,
yeah,
like
yeah.
these are people who actually, I think it sounds to me like, especially given the support conversations that I've read, which are really compelling and well localized. And then this stuff, like, I'm like, this is like people put a lot of work into making like a genuinely compelling product, or, whatever you want to call it. And I didn't get to see it. And I enjoyed
Mhm.
what I saw, but like I would have enjoyed it a lot more if I saw even 20% of this stuff.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, you get a little bit like Athos does kind of explain like how Nurgle and he were friends and how they spent like many years like studying together, and they kind
Yeah.
of bring up
I like that part.
Arcadia.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And Arcadia being the hidden village in the Nevada desert where dragons and humans coexist. And you get this really interesting thing where you kind of Athos kind of has this guilt about participating in the war, the scouring, and driving away the dragons because when he starts to study and live with the people of Arcadia, he's like, oh, like it was possible for humans and the dragons to coexist with one another, and so him and Nurgle protecting Arcadia is kind of a way for them to atone. A way for Athos to atone for what he's done, which is also a really interesting idea, and that the dragons are actually more it's more complicated than this. Like the dragons were trying to destroy humanity, and so humanity had to fight back, which is kind of the impression you get from the initial world building that they give you. And in reality, it's not like that. And then they also, and you get some of this in the main game because finding out that Ninian and Nils are dragons, right? Is like, oh, like these characters that I've been protecting or that we've formed a bond with over time, like they're dragons. So clearly, like this human dragon war was like more complicated and maybe darker than was previously believed or presented to the player. And of course, when Elliewood, accidentally kills or well, her harms Ninian. I mean, she did well. That's also a thing. So she does die if you don't have a high enough support. But if you have a high enough support between Elliewood and Ninian, she will actually live. But
Oh, okay. Definitely died
regardless,
for me.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But yeah, so that is like a really harsh kind of reminder of that too. Like that, they've created, humanity created these weapons to kill dragons and they're so effective, but that, Ellie would even like moves without thinking upon seeing her in her dragon form. And, that's like really it's a really difficult moment for him because he's like killed this person that he's had this connection with and probably in love with or whatever. I mean that's kind of the what's heavily like kind of suggested by the game, even if you don't get the like high support rank with them or whatever.
Yeah.
um
Oh yes,
and
one of my
so
favorite lines was the Nils. Whatever you do, don't fall in love with him.
Yeah.
I was like, that's so like shoujo fantasy anime.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, some of it is like none of that is you're totally right, Audra. Like it is very like typical fantasy and typical kind of like shojo or like even shonen to a certain extent storytelling, right? But there's a lot of emotion and heart behind that too. But
Hmm.
I think
Yeah.
you miss a lot of that, how those things connect to each other without getting this more deeper backstory, because it is kind of similar, like Athos and Elliewood and Nurgle, and the other characters are all kind of dealing with a very similar thing here with the relationship between humans and dragons, and trying to, and the relationship between like using power and the consequences of using power and the consequences that has on you and the people around you, right? But you're really missing a lot of those pieces without that kind of deeper level of information that you can only get through some pretty arduous requirements.
I
Yeah.
I feel like the other piece with that is a lot of those story beats that you just talked about are weirdly spread out throughout the game,
Yes. Yeah.
which now knowing, like when I got to the post-credit scene and you find out a little bit more about this is a thing, the reason we went to Burn and did all that stuff that seemed completely, off to the side otherwise,
Yes. Yes.
was because of what happens in the Binding Blade. But up until that point, I was like, oh, as you were going through this, it's like, okay, the Athos stuff starts in like the early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And then we take a complete bypass, and most of the stuff with Athos's backstory and the history of the dragons is like the last 2 chapters where it actually gets discussed, 3 chapters.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't come out until the very end, and it would have been a lot more interesting if it wasn't so backloaded, I feel like. If you could sit with it more and have time to interact with that knowledge and that lore throughout the game.
Well, as it stands, when Athos first is introduced, you almost are like, oh, it's a cameo.
Yeah.
Because he kind of just shows up and then leaves.
That makes sense. And yeah, I think that gets to some of the weirdness of just how things are meted out here. Because I actually found that section with Zephiel and Burn and all that stuff. I actually thought that was like the most compelling part of the story, because it was like this really self-contained sort of like small thing where I was like, I don't really understand why you hate this kid so much, but like it felt like a whole thing. Whereas I think partially because of like how much they're trying to bury the story and then how they're spreading the story out, like even if they had like maybe even cut that part out and kept all the Athos stuff going, like it would have been stronger. But I feel like it goes like chapters like 10 through 19, I feel like, or 11 through 19, I feel like that nothing happens. And then like a lot of stuff happens, and then like it kind of moves over to this direction, and then it kind of moves back. And yeah, I mean, it just makes me really wish that they had found a way to kind of make all these sort of moving parts sort of into like a more cohesive whole.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you guys are saying. Kind of like what you're getting at, what you were getting at, Lucas, is they all those plot elements and story elements feel very disconnected from one another, and that is a flaw with the way they've chosen to tell the story and structured the plot. And Zach, like you're talking about how the stuff with Burn is in some ways the most interesting, because you have this, you have the king and he's jealous of his son, and he has a poor relationship with the queen because she's from another country, and it's kind of obviously like an arranged marriage kind of situation, and he has a woman that is not his wife that he's actually in love with, and he has a daughter with her, who's Guinevere. And Guinevere and Zephiel have a close relationship, despite the fact that their parents are kind of at odds with one another. And there's this like kind of almost succession crisis where
that happens over the course of like 3 or 4 chapters too. You know what I mean? Like I feel like it's like very dense.
Yeah. Yeah, and that stuff is all extremely important for Binding Blade, because I mean Zephiel is the primary antagonist of the previous game, and what you're seeing is how Zephiel goes from being like a really a good person, right? Like as a kid, he's very warm to his sister despite these kind of issues that his family has. He doesn't let that get in the way between their relationship. he seems like a very noble and good-hearted person. And basically, this experience where his father tries to have him killed out of jealousy is kind of what sets him on the path that he takes in the Binding Blade, where he is, basically trying to amass all this power and bring all of the countries under his heel, because he feels he's basically led to believe that you need to have this immense amount of power to ensure like peace and stability for the world. And he develops that worldview because of the events that happen in this game, that his father kind of betraying him and trying to have him killed, and his father kind of like using this, letting his personal emotions like even affect the stability of the country, right? Because if Zephiel is killed, then that creates like a whole problem, and there's people who are loyal to him as the heir then, and not necessarily loyal to the king. And so, if he were to have died, maybe that would have caused a war. And so like Zephiel's experience from that is like, oh, I actually need to become hardened to maintain stability and order. And that's only something that comes from the trauma of the events of this game, which is very interesting. And then also the kind of things that Eliwood and Athos and Nurgle are all dealing with, like using the dragons as a means for power and not recognizing them as sentient beings with their own legitimacy, and that they could be coexisted with. That's also the major theme of the Binding Blade, because I made, how Zephiel is trying to conquer the continent is by using the power of dragons, just like Nurgle did. Um, and he's trying to subjugate the dragons under his thumb and basically use them as tools of war. And so you're having those kind of same themes, pulled through between both games. But also for the Western audience, we didn't play Binding Blade, so a lot of Japanese players would immediately recognize those
Aw.
same themes, but we don't, because we didn't get that experience first, right? Um, so that's like a major issue with the kind of larger overall like themes and message of the narrative that we kind of miss by not having that experience before. And I think it is really hard to like write a game that is in a lot of ways a follow up to the previous one, but then also like a prequel that's supposed to be playable for people who have no knowledge. Like that's a
So it makes something like Lufia 2 such a
Was literally
miraculous game.
thinking that.
I knew
yeah,
Lucas was
yeah.
thinking that. I stole it from you. I knew I was.
Monster.
Yeah, and like this game just doesn't it I think if you had played Binding Blade first, it's a lot more successful, but I think it's good as a prequel that kind of expands on what the Binding Blade was doing. I don't think it's as good as a standalone experience. And that's unfortunate, because that's the way that we kind of experienced it, right? And that all of you experienced it, and that is a major like flaw with the storytelling, but it is also a very hard thing to to achieve. And maybe they just put too much on the shoulders of this game and this storytelling.
I I'm curious. I as you're saying that, and we were talking earlier about the like multiple playthroughs and stuff like that. It almost feels like this game is like the storytelling aspect they were doing with this game, where you have to do the multiple playthroughs, kind of plays into the way that the game itself is almost like another playthrough of like where it's like repeating the Binding Blade, where like if they packaged these two together and had like one game where you were playing through it like as Roy, as Eliwood, as Hector, where you were getting pieces of the story put together over the course of multiple playthroughs, it could be a really cool cohesive story.
Man, this sounds like Three Houses then.
Yeah, exactly. Where or I mean, or what's the Suikoden 3?
Fates. Yeah, or Suikoden 3.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Where
yeah,
you're getting
no,
like multiple like paths as you're going, and you can pick the order or something like that. Like, because yeah, this felt very scattered and did not feel like it connected very well, but because it was being pulled through that main through line, and yeah, the hidden stuff is a whole different problem, but
Yeah, and you're totally right, Lucas. And like, if these games were at some point remade and packaged together, I do think in a lot of ways that would be the ideal way to experience them. Because I think also a lot of the side characters, and we haven't really gotten into this yet, but they are all directly tied to characters that were in the Binding Blade. Like a lot of them, not every single one, but a lot of them. And I'll give some examples of that. So, some characters actually do appear in the game. So, for example, Eliwood and Hector both appear. Hector is very like important to the initial kind of first part of the story of the Binding Blade, and then his daughter appears. Then you have like Bartray is a major character in the Binding Blade, which is probably surprising because it's like this
What?
guy.
Yeah.
But
I
yes,
mean, I wouldn't know because I let him die. So, oh, oops.
He was one of the characters I like was like, this guy is so generic and boring. I am not using him. Dorcas all the way.
He's a major character. Carol. So I don't know if anybody recruited Carol because you can either recruit.
Is he the
Carol.
swordsman guy?
Yes.
Yeah.
The
Carol
swordmaster
was a late game MVP for me. So
yes, he is so you know how Athos is like the character you get at the end of the game that helps you win basically if you're not strong enough.
Yeah.
Which it's an archetype.
He's the one who helped me do like the previous 3 chapters. Carol was for me.
and Carol is that for Binding Blade. So he's a character you get. He's like almost max level, extremely high stats that you get at the end of the game to kind of help you finish the game. So yeah, he has a niece that's in the Binding Blade. Then you have so Wrath, his father, and then his children are in the Binding Blade and are very important if you take the Sakai route. Let me see. I'm trying to. Nino. So Nino's children are in Binding Blade and are early characters you get that are pretty important. Who else is? Sorry, there's so many characters and so many connections between them. But yeah,
really
Canis.
cool.
Yeah, Canis is the son of a very important character in the Binding Blade, and she's actually mentioned in some of the supports that he has. And then his son actually appears as well. And then Guinevere, Zephiel's sister, she's a major character in the Binding Blade as well. So there's basically like so many of the characters actually have connections to the characters of the previous game, and that's again something that you miss if from our perspective without having played that game, but that I think Japanese players like really got a kick out of is seeing the origins of some of these characters or the relatives of characters that they knew from the Binding Blade. And
I would like a remake.
Yeah.
Right?
It'll probably happen at some point. I mean, I feel like Fire Emblem characters are popular enough that it's a good possibility, but I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. And I think it's cool, you also see like some characters are very different. So like Bartray is a lot different in Binding Blade than he is in this one. Carol is a completely different character. Like here, he's referred to as the Sword Demon, and in Binding Blade, he's referred to as the Sword Saint. So he kind of has a complete character transformation, and through some of his supports, you can kind of see that start to happen. Yeah, there's just like a lot of really interesting, connections between the two. Um, and I think so much of this game's like characters and that kind of like your investment in the characters is reliant on the previous game, and kind of shows too how I think a lot of this game was the pre-production and the kind of initial development of it was not really intended for a Western audience, and then about halfway through is when they decided it would come to the West, and so you have it kind of drawn between it being an entry point and then it being so heavily tied to the previous game. And that is kind of creates these kind of disconnection problems, I think, in the narrative and some of the characters. Yeah,
it is like a game of dissonances at times.
Mhm.
It's an interesting one. And I'm glad you brought up the support conversations, because I feel like we should at least kind of touch on some of our favorites of those, because I do feel like, again, like if some of those supports were easier to access in the way that it would be in like even like an Awakening, from my experiences, this game would again be much stronger, because like even characters like for me, like I didn't get that many supports because it's just like I was so worried about like I don't know not dying all the time.
Mhm.
Because especially in the late game, I was just like, I really struggled. We'll talk about it in a little bit, but there's a Gaiden chapter 26X, I think it is. It
Oh,
involves like this like poison and stuff. And I was like,
yes.
oh my gosh, like it took me like 12 tries to get through that. But the supports that I did see, even for like characters like I saw Elliewood and Hector's, and it was just like about like their past and their history, and you get a little sense of it in like their normal conversations, but like there's a little bit of like joking humor, which is something this game is completely devoid of, except for in some of these support conversations. So I really liked that one because it was about like who was good at math, and it was just kind of silly, but like it was good. I enjoyed it, and I thought that it really helped even make Elliewood, who is pretty boring, more interesting. So, what were some other supports you guys saw, and which ones did you guys like? I know for Ben, the answer is all of them, but
I'll
Yeah.
start. So there were two in particular that I wanted to draw attention to. I didn't get them in the game. I went through and was reading afterwards because I was actually really disappointed by the ones I got in the game because I didn't realize that it caps it at 5. So it limits you to only having 5 conversations per character.
Yeah.
Oh,
You can only have
Which-
one max support and then 2
Yeah.
B rank supports. Yeah.
So
And that's for
I-
gameplay reasons mostly.
yeah,
That
yeah.
makes sense.
because you do get stat buffs for it as well, apparently. But
Mhm.
it's like I went through and was like trying to get Lynn's I like the Lynn Wrath one.
Mhm.
And so
Oh,
I
yeah,
was
I got
trying
that
to
one.
get that all the way up. But because I had 2 conversations between Lynn and Hector, I couldn't finish the Wrath one because you needed one more. So I was very frustrated by that. The 2 that I wanted to bring attention to were Rebecca and Dart.
Mhm.
And this was a random one that I clicked on because I was like, wait, why does Dart only have like 3 people he can have conversations with? And why is one of them Rebecca? This feels completely random. And so I read through it, and it's like this whole thing where Rebecca is looking for her long lost brother, who Dart Dart has like lost his memory, but appears to actually be her long lost brother that was rescued by pirates. And it's like, again, so random and so like I would have never guessed or known that without the additional dialogue and the supports. It doesn't impact the story or the characters at all, but it's this another layer to them that actually makes those characters interesting.
Yeah, and Lucas, just to add on that, so Will also has supports with Dart, and Will is Dart's like childhood best friend, and they were
Okay.
together when Dart actually like they got separated from each other, and then Dart was injured and lost. That's how he lost his memory. So Will also is a character who will recognize Dart as Dan, and Will is also from Foray, where both Dart and Rebecca are from. And so part of like why he didn't return home is because he felt so guilty about losing Dan. And then they also have a really interesting support where they like he realizes that he's his friend, and Dart kind of gets into like what happened to him or whatever. So they also are like have that same connection. And Will is also another character who seems like very like generic, like one note, but
Yeah.
it adds an interesting wrinkle to him too. Yeah.
The thing that this makes me think of, there's a piece of wisdom that I've heard repeatedly in D&D circles. If your character's backstory never comes up in the game, it doesn't matter. And I feel like that could be applied as just a general writing thing of these characters feel generic and boring in a lot of cases. And I'm like, you have no reason to really want to pursue the more information with them if they don't give you more, at least a teaser of some of this stuff in the game that would make you want to pursue it. And I feel like that's one of the best examples I could find. I mean, even with that, I found this one that I found interesting, and you just threw two more out that were like made another character interesting.
Yeah, there's not enough hooks to make you investigate the characters more. Yeah.
And then the other one was, which is a lot less, one of the few that is actually explored a little bit in the game, was Matthew Jafar. Jafar starts out as a bad guy and murders Matthew's girlfriend.
Yeah.
And fellow spy. They have an A support available where you can have the conversations between them where, like, Matthew is confronting Jafar about the fact that, you know, they may have, they may be letting you fight, but I'll never forgive you kind of thing. And a lot of the dialogue, I found it really interesting because a lot of the dialogue in it is just this, like, ... from Jafar, with Matthew just like yelling at him about how terrible of a person he is, as Jafar is like not taking the bait and not like getting into everything. And their A support is Matthew threatening Nino as like revenge of like, you took this person from me and now I'm going to take this person from you. And it's like such a dark turn for Matthew that we like never see that side of him. And then Jafar kind of like, he's able to kind of like work through things and like get that anger out of his system. And it's not like he forgives him or anything like that, but he gets a chance to like realize where his lines are, that he's not that person. That, and again, it makes him more complex, more interesting from the otherwise kind of boring jokey thief that he is for most of the game outside of that one chapter.
Yeah, those are great examples, Lucas. And yeah, I agree. I think that the Matthew Jafar support is one of the better ones in the game, because it does a really good job of humanizing and giving you a different dimension to Matthew, but also to Jafar, and show that like Jafar is not just like this mindless killing machine. Like there is something more to him, and you see a little bit of that in the main story, but some more of his supports like flesh that out in a really interesting way. Yeah.
I also like to support with Nino, actually. That's the one I ended up getting with Jafar, just because I think they had a one leg up on it. So it was easier to pick up. And it was pretty interesting, too.
I didn't get the full support for that, so what happens sort of as you go through it?
Just that Nino kind of shows him that he can be better, I think. Okay. I mean, they bond, and it's just cute. I think I did like Guy and Priscilla, actually. I stumbled upon that one, and that was cute.
Yeah, that's a good one. Priscilla actually has, I think, other than the main, like Hector and Elliewood, has the highest number of romantic supports in the game, but only one of them can actually be a successful romantic support, which is the one with Urk. Because none of the other characters that she can support with are have enough connection to nobility to actually get to marry her, which is a kind of an interesting wrinkle. So there's a lot of tragedy with her love stories unless you pair her with Urk. Because I think she supports with Guy, and then she also supports with Heath, as I think the other and Urk. And Urk can marry her because his connections to Pent give him the ability to get like a peerage, so that he can marry her. But yeah, Heath is like a deserter, and Guy is a Sakaean, so that's a no go with the bounds of their society, which is sad. It's very sad.
Then I think I just started the Florin and Hector one, which is kind of funny just because it's like he doesn't even recognize that she's trying to talk to him.
Yeah. I read that one. That one's pretty fun.
Yeah, it's cute. Yeah. So I had a couple that I wanted to talk about too. So one of my favorite characters in the game is a Gates, and he is a character that you only recruit. So there's the first Lloyd or Linus chapter. This is a split chapter where you there's two versions. So most people will get the Lloyd version because the requirements for the Linus one are a little more difficult, and that's where you recruit Wallace. But if you get the Linus chapter, and the requirement for that is the combined level of Lynn, Elliewood, and Hector needs to be 50 or higher, then you fight Linus first instead of Lloyd, and it's a different chapter and a different location.
And it
And
was
then
brutal. It was
yeah,
brutal. It was so
yeah,
hard.
yeah,
It was the first time in the game where I was like, okay, like this game has hands, and then it has had hands the rest of the game.
yeah, yeah.
That one was rough.
Yeah, and so Gates is recruitable there though, and he is. You can recruit him with Dart because he and Dart like have a history. He's had a run-in with the Fargus pirates before, and Gates is like he's a rich fail son of a merchant, basically a very successful merchant who runs like a merchant guild, and he is like trying wandering around the continent as like a mercenary trying to find himself essentially. And so I think he's a good example because he has basically no relevance to the plot at all, uh, partially because he's also a hard character to acquire. Most players won't see him, so he can't be super important to the story. But it kind of shows how much effort they put into a lot of these side characters that aren't really important to the story. So his support with Isadora is a funny one, and I like that one because it's just like really silly and goofy. And that one is essentially like um, he has a bird that starts nesting in his hair, and Isadora kind of like makes fun of him for that. Yeah. And she is kind of like, "Oh, well, you have to give him a name." And he's like, "I don't want to give him a name. He's like in my hair. Like I need to get rid of him." And she's like, "Oh, it's cute, whatever." And then she names him like Wilson. And then their like final support, like Wilson actually goes and flies away. And then Gates is really sad because he got like attached to the bird. And it's very funny. And Isadora is like, "Oh, well, maybe he, kind of found what he spent some time with you, but he found like what his true calling is. And maybe one day when you find what your true calling is, then you guys will be reunited." And it's like, oh, that's like really touching, but it's also like a really goofy and funny scenario of like, this character. And he a lot of his supports kind of have that kind of comic relief kind of thing going on. But then he also has a support with Fiora, and Fiora is Florina's sister, one of the Ilian Pegasus Knights, and they strike up a conversation, and she figures out that his father was leader of the Merchant Guild, and so she's like, "Oh, well, we have so much respect for your father in Ilia because there was this one season where the crops all died because they're a very snowy region. It's very harsh. It's very difficult to grow food." So they almost starved her village, and the merchant guild came and brought food and supplies, and that saved them. And so she's like, "Oh, I have so much debt to your father." And then Gates reacts like really poorly to that. He's like, "No, like I rejected my father. I renounced, the merchant guild or whatever." And she's like very confused. And then in their, next support, she's like, "Well, what, why did you leave your father? Like, why do you not, why are you not proud of your origins?" And then he goes into this really heart wrenching and harrowing account of when he was a child and how he used to ride on the boat with his father and how he was so proud, and his father had this merchant fleet and they were so successful, and he saw his father as this great man. And then he went down into the galley of the ship, and he saw that, he explains that, well, if you have to rely on the winds and your sails, like you can't make your shipments on time, and you're subject to the whims of nature. And so the merchant guild was using these galleys where they have people rowing, and he went down to the hold of the ship and saw all these people, men, women, children, like emaciated, poorly treated, rowing and rowing and rowing until they would die. And then when they died, he said, that the merchants would just throw them overboard off the ship, and then you basically hire more slaves. And that's the moment where he was like, I'm completely, disowning this. I'm leaving the merchant guild. I'm disowning my father, and I want to have nothing to do with this. And it's like a really powerful and dark moment for, this character who otherwise is like really goofy or funny or whatever. And I think it's just he's a really good example of how they can do this duality between these kind of lighthearted moments and then these really dark, interesting, kind of complex emotional moments with a character like that who really has no like importance to the story at all. But it's like, oh, like there's more depth to why he's like wandering around trying to find himself. It's because his entire identity was crafted around his love for his father, and then that was completely dashed when he figured out the reality of his father's wealth and influence came from abusing people. And yeah, I just think that's one of the best examples of the writing in the game. um and I that's why he's such an interesting character.
As we talk about these characters, it makes me more sad that I struggled so much in the back half of this game when I really even realized that you could do supports that I couldn't worry about it. Although I think that maybe part of the reason I struggled so much was because I missed these support conversations and they would have helped my stats. Maybe, I don't know.
It's pretty negligible.
Yeah, you
Okay.
don't need them, but they are beneficial. But yeah, it's not like a must have to like get through the game or anything. Yeah.
Also, Lucius and Raven is the best
Oh
one.
yeah, yeah. Thank you, Audra, for reminding. I wanted to talk about that one too.
Yeah, go
So,
ahead.
so this is really interesting because Lucius and Raven are, I think, the first example of a gay characters in Fire Emblem. And they have a paired support together, and neither Raven nor Lucius have a paired support with anybody else. So, and there's heavily implied to be romantic. Obviously they don't get married because of kind of the time frame that this game came out in and the society that the game is in takes place in and everything, but heavily implied to be to be lovers. But it's really interesting because you also get a lot of Raven's backstory and Lucius's backstory, where they were part of a noble house in Lycia. Raven was the heir, and Priscilla, his sister, was also part of that noble family. And Lucius was an orphan, and he was taken in by the family as kind of a playmate and kind of assistant or steward to the family. And so they grew up together and they formed this bond. And then their house was actually kind of betrayed and um, uh, framed essentially for like a crime of misuse of funds. And then I believe Raven and Priscilla's parents were killed. And then their house was like, um, was kind of dissolved, and the lands were given to Ostia, who Hector is the heir to, and is the main house in Lycia. And so Raven, why he's motivated for revenge against Ostia, is he blames them and he blames Hector and Hector's brother for the downfall of his family. And Lucius is trying to convince him to like give up his revenge. And eventually, through their supports, he does basically convince Raven to give up his revenge. Raven becomes convinced that Hector and Ostia didn't really have anything to do with the downfall of his house, and he gives up on that, and then they decide to live together. And so they have a really cute part of their support where Lucius is like, oh, well, you need to, you can't just go wandering. You have to settle down and get married. And Raven's like, why would I need a wife? I have you
Yeah.
to bother me or whatever. And it's cute. But yeah, so I think that's a really important one just because it does add a lot of depth to both their characters, but also it's a little bit of representation in this game.
Yeah.
Which is cool, especially for a game from like 2003. Very
Yes.
very rare. Yeah.
Even if they're just roommates.
Well, they're definitely not roommates. They're definitely not. Yeah, because again, like they're showing it through the mechanics, right? Like because they have a paired support together, all the other paired supports in the game are romantic. So the implication is
Gotcha. Okay.
that their paired support is also romantic. Yeah, yeah. So it's a neat little way that they kind of show you that without having to be like more explicit than maybe Nintendo would have allowed in 2003. Yeah.
Well, I think, it's cool too because like those are two of like for me, like those two characters were like two of my absolute MVPs. So they also made them pretty
Mhm.
powerful. I mean, like until
Yeah.
I got to chapters like 28, 29, 30, and then into the very end game where I feel like, at least for me, like the way I was playing, like even though I was like having Lucius and Raven just destroy things over and over and over again, they still weren't strong enough to do anything in some of these final battles, which drove me a little crazy, to be honest with you, with the way
I
some of it worked.
the difficulty spike in those last couple battles. We talked a little bit about it with the mechanics last time of the way that the throne works, or the defense boosts from the fort and the throne, but that spike at the end, that wasn't just you. I promise.
No, it was not.
I talked last time a bit about the grinding in the arena, and like I was being very cognizant of, like, I ended up with like over 100k of just spare cash laying around. I had multiple characters that were level 20 pre and post uh class upgrade, and I was still had characters that I could not do damage with for multiple enemies towards the end. Like using the special weapons, I I actually was laughing a little bit. I felt bad because, as Ben was describing the whole Elliowood Ninian thing and talking about these weapons that are designed to kill dragons, and I found myself laughing because I was like, yeah, if only they worked that well on the last boss. Because that was rough. Like, again, maxed out characters, and you like using these special weapons, and you still can't do damage to the last boss.
Yeah, I mean, I think the last boss is crazy. But like even like some of the difficulty, like that one we were talking about earlier, 26X, the Genesis or
Oh yeah,
whatever it's
yeah.
called, was really, really hard, especially because there was like that bishop sort of on the edge that if you I can't remember exactly how it worked, but eventually it would start firing off spells just like across the map that you couldn't really do anything, but at least I couldn't do anything about, that were just like wiping me out immediately. Um, I thought that like at a certain point, like it just became about avoiding them, and I can handle that. Like that was interesting and that was difficult. There was one earlier where there's this like magic user who is basic or someone who's actually kind of dampening, like you can't use magic, and I accidentally got that dude to disappear, but
Mhm.
then that was a huge mistake because then like the person who's sitting on the throne has that lightning spell that just hits people across the
Bolting.
map,
Yeah.
Yep.
bolting. And I was like, oh, okay, well now I know I'm not going to mess with that magic guy. So like there were times where I was like, this is really hard and unreasonable, but like I was still okay with it. But like some of those final bosses I thought was like, okay, I have one character who can do damage. And even these ones who I trained really hard, it felt very unsatisfying for these characters who were really strong for 28 chapters just to like fall off the map like that.
And then to
Yeah.
be replaced with the characters that come out of
Oh, man.
nowhere that are
Yeah.
already full
Yeah.
leveled and better than anything you have. That felt very disappointing to me as someone who likes the
The character progression.
I get invested in the
yeah.
characters. It's like I picked Florina, maxed out 2020. She was dominating throughout the entire game, and then I got to the end and I was just like, and she can't do anything for this entire last section and dies in one hit.
Yeah, I mean they especially the final chapter, where the first part where you're fighting Nurgle and he's like opening the like cells, and then the like resurrected versions of the previous bosses that you fought. They do also give them like the most powerful weapons in the game, so it's like a way for you to get those powerful weapons, but the problem being that you have to kill them in order to get them. So by giving these already strong characters like really powerful weapons, it makes it difficult to fight them. It's like I will say I think part of this is because you guys are playing like on Elliewood normal mode, so that also kind of in some ways restricts the strength of your characters because um essentially like a lot of characters are recruited from the enemy, and when you play on hard mode, or particularly Hector's hard mode, they essentially get something called what are called hard mode bonuses, where their base stats are significantly higher because the base stats of all enemies on maps are higher. And so, since they start as an enemy, they also get a buff to their initial base stats, and that's very
Huh.
important for the harder, the hard mode of the game, because when you recruit them, like base stats are very important because those are static, right? You always can rely on those, and that provides the floor from which they grow from. So, that means is that on the hardest difficulties, your characters in some cases actually start stronger because you've recruited them from the enemy side. And then you also are just put in a lot more scenarios where you are able to get experience for your characters because there's so many more enemies on each map and everything like that. So, like I'm so used to playing on like Hector's hard mode that like I don't like usually by the end of the game, like the lords can definitely damage the final boss, like the dragon. Like usually, I could kill the dragon with Hector Elliewood pretty easily. Or the other character, that initial chapter where you're fighting the dead Black Fang guys. Usually, my characters can do pretty significant damage to them. At least if they're ganging up on them. But I do think that that's a flaw with the difficulty balancing, because the Elliewood normal mode doesn't necessarily prepare your characters for that challenge, and so it's kind of a strange inverse difficulty curve a little bit, where yeah, the hard mode is harder, but it's also giving you these advantages that allow you to deal with hard mode a little easier, and Elliewood normal mode just doesn't provide that.
It's almost like they
Um,
provide incentive to try hard mode.
yeah,
Yeah.
to a certain extent, yeah. But yeah, I mean that is an issue with the game, and Athos is part of an archetype that's called the Goto, because in the first Fire Emblem, Goto is a sage that you get at the very end of the game with like really high magic and staff rank, and so he can use any staff, and he's very powerful to kind of help you get through the final chapters. And Athos kind of fills that same role, right? Like he comes in with all three super powerful magic tomes, like the most powerful anima tome, light tome, and dark tome. He can use all three of them. And so if you're not able to kill Nurgle with the other characters or the dragon, Athos can do it. And then they give you Renault as well, who has like max staff rank on, right
Yeah, I think
before the end.
I
And
missed
he
Renault, I think.
oh yeah, that
Yeah.
that will make things
That
harder,
didn't help.
because he comes with a staff that just heals everyone in like a pretty wide radius,
Oh,
so
that'd
he
be
can
nice.
just heal a bunch of characters at once. Yeah. So
Yeah. He's like
um,
level 16,
mhm.
like bishop or something.
Yeah. So it's like a way to like, okay, ensures that you can see the end of the game even if your characters didn't get strong enough. But that can also be pretty unsatisfying if you have to rely on that,
Yeah.
because then it feels like
Well,
you're,
And
uh,
it's
yeah,
and Athos is required. You can't
right.
take it. I was actually looking at it
yeah,
because I was like, I have a bunch of mages trained up that can use that have even S rank in
mhm.
the right stuff, and the anima book is actually restricted to just Athos.
Yeah.
So I
It's
couldn't
'cause
take it off and give it to Nino or anyone else. And
yes,
the and you can't take him out of the party. Like he's
mhm.
a required character for that end game. And
He's
it's
the
like, okay, well, I
Gandalf.
guess we're just using him.
Yeah, Audra, he is the Gandalf.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so you do have to use, and yeah, they don't let you take 4 blaze off of him because he is like the weapons all come from the 7 heroes from like the story, the scouring or whatever, and that is his weapon. So, obviously he won't like give it up to anybody else because he is one of the 7 heroes. But yeah, you can give the light tome or dark tome to somebody else, but the other
Yep.
problem is like constitution is an important stat for those skills or for those weapons because the tomes are very heavy. And so most of your mages have very low constitution, which means that they're heavily weighed down by those tomes. And so he has the benefit of having pretty high constitution, so he's not weighed down. So unfortunately, like giving Lucius, for example, the light tome, yeah, he can use it, but it weighs him down so much he's probably going to get doubled by Nurgle, and like that's a huge problem. So it's better to just let Athos do it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Definitely got doubled by the dragon, and it was very sad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I didn't go as crazy as Lucas on my min-maxing either, obviously, but I know that Lucas did, right? And even if I hadn't, like, I feel like I was thoughtful about like really like being narrow about like who I was leveling and things like that. Again, like I didn't abuse the arena horribly, but like I used the arena and Hector was extremely strong by the end of the game. But like it's like it feels like on normal, at least according to what Lucas is saying, like it's almost impossible to have your characters in a position where they're useful at the end there. It's just an interesting, it's a design choice that I feel like I'm sure it's trying to appeal to extremely hardcore players, but like Lucas is playing in a hardcore way and he's still not able to do it. So I think it's interesting.
On normal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and yeah, I mean, especially against the dragon, like your characters are all pretty useless against the dragon except for Eliwood, Lynn, Hector, and Athos.
And that was
pretty much
what I ended up having to do.
Yeah,
the only way I got around it was using nils to was basically using buffs.
Yeah.
And I was able to get I had Wrath ended up doing decent damage because he could double against the dragon. He couldn't but he couldn't damage it unless I buffed him first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you can take advantage of the dancer buffs to also boost a character high enough. But yeah, it's and like I don't know. I guess it's like story reasons. Like they're the only ones who are wielding like those legendary weapons, so they're the only ones who can really fight the dragon. But it's not.
And make it a cutscene.
Yeah. Because it is basically what it is. There's not actually that much strategy to fighting the dragon. It's just like, okay, who can tank one hit so I can heal them enough and then do damage to the dragon, and then that doesn't die immediately. And then that's just what you do like 5 turns in a row until the dragon's dead, right? Like
the first time I did that, I moved my healer up, and then the dragon targeted my healer instead of the Lord.
It
was.
Yeah, and that's why you have to use a physic or you have to use Renault with the, I forget what the staff is called, but the staff that
Fortify.
heals him. Yeah, Fortify, yeah. And so he can stay outside the range of the dragon, or you can use Pint for the same purpose, right? Or another staff user, but you have to keep him away, yeah. Or the dragon will just like go and kill them. So there's not much strategy to fighting the dragon. It's just Yeah, and then in the previous chapter, there's also not much strategy to fighting those characters. Like essentially, the door opens, a group of them will come out. You need to surround them with your units immediately and kill them as fast as possible. Because if you don't, then the other doors open, and then you'll get overwhelmed by like 6 of them at once, right? And that's basically it, right? And then you go up to Nurgle, and then only a few people can damage Nurgle. So you either use Athos to do it, or you surround him with like Eliwood and Hector, and then heal them basically, right? I mean so there's a lot of more strategic complexity to the other maps. The final boss kind of section is just really a stat check in a lot of ways, and that's not as interesting.
Yeah, a final boss stat check seems like an odd choice when in a game where you can't raise your stats anymore at that point.
Yeah. And that's a big problem with Fire Emblem final bosses in general. Like just pretty much, I mean, I think pretty much every game in the series has that problem, right? Where they just have this really high stat thing that maybe only a couple characters can actually damage, and then you just heal and turtle it out. And most of the games in the series have that problem, and I would prefer they just make a more complicated, interesting map design
Right.
instead.
Yeah, yeah.
Like I thought like chapter 29, the one like two before this, or before we actually get to it
Mhm.
where you're having to protect the throne, like I thought that was like pretty interesting map design for like a castle looking
Mhm.
thing. Like you protecting the throne, but you also have like these treasure chests that are kind of far away. So you have to really be thoughtful about like how far are you going to allow yourself to move. You've got these NPCs who you want to try to protect. Like it's just such like a whiplash in these final like 8 chapters between what I think is like genuinely unfun and unfair or just boring with the dragon, and then like things that like where I really had to think about and use my strategy.
Yeah.
I just think it's sort of
Yeah.
interesting.
I
Yeah.
I really liked I know you said chapter 26X was rough, but I found it fun still. Like there was
Oh
a
yeah,
lot of
it was still
strategy
fun.
to it. It was a
Yeah.
Mhm.
complicated map. 26, the one before that, where you have to like where you have Nino on one side and Jafar on the other, and the prince in the middle, and you have to like
Try
decide
to
how
keep
you're
them all
splitting your
alive.
party to
Yeah.
keep them all alive. Like that was really cool and actually challenging. Because I mean, with
Yeah.
that,
Yeah. I
even if you
agree.
have good
I think those
stats,
chapters, Battle Before
there's only
Dawn.
so much you can do if you don't strategize correctly, because you only have so much movement.
Yeah. Yeah. I think those 3 chapters, like Battle Before Dawn, Night of Farewells, and then Cog of Destiny. So that's the one where you protect Zephiel, then the side chapter where you fight Sonya, and then the one where you either fight Lloyd or Linus, whichever one's left. I think those are kind of really the peak of the game in terms of the map designs. And then Zach, you were talking
Agreed.
about chapter 31, which is Sands of Time, where you're defending the throne. Those I think are all very good. And then after that, it just becomes kind of a slog, right? And that's unfortunate. But before that, it's really great. And they kind of get the most out of like throwing promoted units at you and like interesting configure enemy groups. And um, the Night of Farewells in particular is really interesting because it's on water and you're on these platforms, and then the paths between platforms will disappear and then reappear on certain turns. So you kind of have to maneuver your units, and that's an interesting challenge. So yeah, but I agree. The final 4 chapters are a bit of a slog for sure.
Oh, I was gonna say regarding that as well. Zach, you mentioned the long range magic. One of the things that I normally don't do in games that I was trying, or that I ended up doing in this a lot, was trying to use the buffs. And one of the things that I found for that in particular was it's like the is it holy water?
Yeah,
Pure water? Yeah.
That sounds right. Yeah.
pure water. Yeah.
Pure water, and just being able to put that on a character who already has fairly high resist, and then those long range magic attacks only have 5 charges, so you can like use the holy water and then move somebody out
Oh, that's a good idea.
into
I should have
range
done
and
that.
like bait them out and stuff like that. Like
Mhm.
little
Yeah,
things like
that's
that, or
good
the
strategy.
dancer
Yeah.
using the dancer buffs.
Hmm.
I've
Yeah,
been trying not to end up with 99 potions in my inventory in games as much.
Yeah, and this is a game that definitely makes you use your resources. That's for sure.
Yes.
You're not benefited by stockpiling, so you should you should use it when you need it. And yeah, like you're saying, Lucas, like you can bait out the ranged magic, but then there's a risk reward with that too, because those siege tomes like bolting, or I forget what the light one is called, or eclipse is the dark one. Those are very heavy. So if the boss is using one, so for example, Sonya, if you actually get to her before she uses the 5 bolting uses, she can't attack you back if she has the bolting, and it also weighs her down. So you can actually kill her much more easily if she still has it. So you have that kind of
Huh.
interplay between, do I bait out her attacks so that then I have an easier approach, but then a harder fight against her, or do I rush and then take my chances with her attacking me from range so that I get to her before she actually expends the tome, and then I have an easy boss fight with her on the throne. Um, so that's yeah, and siege tomes are just a very common way that that Fire Emblem in general adds difficulty or adds kind of an extra layer to maps. And you can get some siege tomes, but they're never as good in your hands as they are in the enemies.
No.
So that's kind of interesting way that they kind of balance the game. Yeah.
I did end up using all of my Hammer charges to on bolting because that was my. Even though you get her very late, I was like, you know what? I've got this this level up item. I'm gonna max out Nino before the end. So I ended up giving her bolting at the beginning, or once she could use it to like get XP on her from a distance, where she could like finish off enemies.
Yeah, and Nino. So Nino is part of an archetype called the Est, because Est is a character that you get really late in the first Fire Emblem, but she starts at a low level, but has very high growths, and so Nino is part of that archetype. She has the highest growths of any character that you can get in the game, but you get her at like level 5 unpromoted at the end of the game. So it's very difficult to raise her up, but if you do, she ends up being extremely strong.
Yeah.
So it makes sense too, Lucas, because you're playing that kind of play style where you're kind of doing the arena a lot and having some chapters where you have like hundreds of turns. And so if you're doing that kind of thing, then you can raise her up to be really, really powerful. And then you get a lot of benefit from her if you do that. So yeah, that's a cool thing about her. And so it's like they're giving you a reason to. It's like, well, why would I ever use this weak character I'm getting at the end of the game? It's like, oh, well, there actually is a reason to use her if you put in the time. But yeah, just kind of an interesting way.
I did find it really amusing regarding her growths. I had a point at the end where I accidentally left her out of position. I was like, oh crap, I'm gonna get wrecked. And the enemies started coming in and attacking Elliewood instead of her, because the AI found her to be more of a threat than Elliewood. I was just like, oh,
that's crazy.
That's a thing that just happened.
Yeah. So there's just like little wrinkles like that kind of make the game interesting, and like why you'd want to have approach different characters on a different playthrough, right? Like you kind of get these little hints when you do your initial playthrough, like, oh, this character maybe does this, or this character has like this thing to them, and so you're like, oh, I don't want to try them now, but maybe I'll play again and try them.
Right.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm guessing that she's good, but like there's no way at this point in the game. Not that it would have mattered, probably. It could have raised her all the way up to 20, but still wouldn't do damage to the final boss.
That's true. Because she can't use the tome.
She can't use the 4 blades, yeah. You can give her like the ice tome, or you can give her, there's I think a wind tome that's like really strong you get at the end.
Yeah, she still was only doing 2 damage to the boss.
Oh, well, yeah, there you go. Yeah.
That's crazy. I will say that my overall feelings, like I feel like I tend to kind of like I've been poking in on like some of the things that I have found a little bit weaker, especially in this second half. But like on the whole, like I feel like this was as Ben pointed out, like a great introduction to Fire Emblem. Like I know that there are some UI things, and Audra, you said something earlier about there being some UI things that you preferred in Sacred Stones. What are some of the quality of life things that you get when you get to Sacred Stones? There are not here.
You can actually level up more easily. And
okay.
Yeah, they have a dungeon that you can progress through and just kind of level grind, which I found, and random battles.
Oh, so this is the last game that doesn't have like sort of that ability to grind, at least not like off, like on the map or like off map.
Well,
is that accurate?
No, Sacred Stones has a world map and then has random battles, and then has the Tower of Volney is a tower that the dungeon that Audra's referencing, where you get access and you can just like, really what you do is you just repeat the first part of that dungeon over and over again to get to grind. And but that is something that was Sacred Stones is a little bit of a callback to Fire Emblem Gaiden, which was then remade as Fire Emblem Echoes on the 3DS. So those are typically, Fire Emblem actually doesn't have that world map structure. Engage brings it back, and then Fates and Awakening also have it, but Path of Radiance, Radiant Dawn, Shadow Dragon, and then New Mystery of the Emblem. So the next 4 games in the series don't have it. So it's not something that is carried over into every game.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's just a
I
little
think
different from this one. From a
Yeah, no, it is. It feels significantly different, Sacred Stones, because of
Okay.
that. It also means you can go to previous locations on the world map and access their shops
yes,
at any time.
Well, that
So
makes a
you're
huge difference.
Yeah.
yes, and then there's also the armory is added to your battle preparation screen, so you can actually just access the armory to get low basic weapons for any weapon type at any time. They're just provided for an inflated cost in Sacred Stones. So they cost a little more gold, but you always have access
Yeah.
to
Well, that
at least base level
Tunes.
weapons.
sounds like it changes the fundamentals of the game dramatically, I'd
Yeah.
imagine.
Yeah, Sacred Stones is a lot easier because of those changes.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
But they also change the design to accommodate that too. So
Yeah.
it's not a cakewalk just because of those things.
Oh no, there's some. I actually found the resource management was a little harder in that one, just because if you're level grinding, you're running out of
Yes.
stuff all the time.
Yes, and you're not necessarily accessing like a bunch of money all the time.
Mhm.
So if you spend a lot of time level grinding, you'll run through a lot of your weapons, and then you're like, "Oh shoot, now I need to do the chapters, and I have nothing left to do that with."
Yeah.
Yeah. So Sacred Stones also does things like they kind of assume you might be doing some level grinding. So there's a lot more like status staves, like enemies with status staves earlier in the game, and things like that to keep you on your toes than there are in this game. It's very rare. Like it happens in this game. The character will have like a berserk staff or sleep staff or something like that, but it's more frequent in Sacred Stones because they kind of assume that you've
Yeah.
grinded
The
your
Berserk
units.
staff was very powerful.
Oh,
That was
yeah.
one of the problems with 26S, where they just kept hitting my
Yes, there was
characters with
one
Berserk, and I'm like, what's
bishop
going on
that-
here? No, stop.
Yep. They hit Raven with that, and then he starts wailing on your squishy mages, and you're
I mean,
like,
it's just
"Oh,
game
shoot."
over at that point.
My-
It's
Yeah.
reset time
My
immediately.
my Kent got hit by that in the
Oh,
last
yeah.
chapter, and he had so much movement as a paladin that I was just like, I can't get my characters away from him. I finally and I was like trying to like trade or rescue to like stop him from attacking, and I was like, it's not letting me do anything. Finally, I went over to him and I used the warp staff to send him away.
That's very smart, Lucas. That's
Yeah.
like
Pretty-
very
yeah.
clever.
Like,
Yeah, that
got
never
one-
would have occurred to me. That would have helped a lot.
well, the only reason was because I didn't want to redo everything. It's like,
Yeah.
I had to.
That's a good reason.
It was so far.
Yeah, no,
like,
that's very clever, Lucas. Yeah, that's very
Yeah.
clever.
I got
lucky.
Because
Because he'll
Big
also
brain
like
Fire Emblem.
Yeah, when you berserk, like he'll attack enemies too. He just attacks
Yeah.
whoever's the easiest to attack. So if you warp him into the enemies, it's like, okay, well he's just gonna go ham on the on the enemy group instead of your guys. So it's like a way to
Exactly.
turn the tables.
That
yeah,
was-
that's,
Yeah.
I couldn't
Yeah.
get him up all the way to Nurgle's. Like it's the guys above with Nurgle that did it to him. So luckily, like one turn later, some generals spawn at the back and start coming up behind you. And that was I just warped him behind the generals so that he would
get
go
distracted.
after them.
Yeah.
I didn't know
That's
how
good.
that was going to work. So I had to do a little trial and error, but it was it paid off.
Yeah, and I think
good.
that also kind of illustrates like the kind of the unique like light bulb moments that Fire Emblem just in general can present you with, where it's like you have to really think on your feet and you're not sure what's going to happen, but you're going to make this decision and then like see how it plays out. And there's a lot of different ways that things can play out, and that's kind of what makes it engaging and fun. Is there's so many
for
variables
sure.
and so many different ways things can permutations of like what can happen. And that's why I keep coming back to it after
for
all
sure.
these years. Yeah.
I mean, I would say like 28 of the 33 maps I did, I thought were engaging and fair and really, really good. You know what I mean? And I said this the previous one, like it is a game that requires constant attention, but also constant flexibility. Because you don't know when like reinforcements are going to come in. And I don't know, when you have 15 units, it's just a lot to track at once, right? So I think that I'm not sure that I'm because I have a lot of other games to play right now, but like it is not going to be long, especially because I just got a Switch too, until I play another Fire Emblem game, because I had a really good time with this, and especially if some of my complaints are addressed at least slightly in some of the future games in terms of like UI and things like that, then like I would be very happy to play more of these.
Yeah, I think we should give some serious consideration to doing Path of Radiance sooner rather than later, because I think
Ooh.
you would really enjoy it, Zach. And I think now that it's kind of getting a resurgence in interest because it's on the GameCube NSO, there's like a lot of reevaluation of that game, and I think it's one of the best in the series. So it'd be really fun to play, and addresses a lot of the problems that we've brought up here, like especially the way supports are accessed is very much improved in Path of Radiance.
Being able to do supports out of game, and the other UI thing that is such a minor thing that I missed from this, being able to set a icon on a specific enemy and have it continue showing their threat range.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that would be so useful. Oh goodness.
Like,
yeah.
That was the thing that took me, like, I kept coming back to over and over and over again, being like, why don't they have this feature yet? This is like so important to just be able to put your guys right outside that range and having to click like every unit individually. Ugh.
Yep, and that is something Path of Radiance allows you to do also, which is nice. So yeah, there's a lot of quality of life kind of improvements that came with the games immediately after this one. So another reason to play more Fire Emblem.
That's a good reason to me. I mean, I'll probably do Sacred Stones first just because I want to, but Path. I mean, it's like the Fire Emblem game that I've been most interested in playing for the longest, just because everybody talks about the storytelling as well, and it sounds like they have the chops to write good stories. I just didn't get to see it this time. So, well, thank the three of you so much for coming along with this journey for me into Fire Emblem. Again, I played a little bit of it, but I wasn't sure. I talk to Ben a lot on this podcast nowadays, which is great for me because he gets me to play things that I am afraid of sometimes. And this is one that I was excited to finally dive into. So let's talk about what's coming up next on Retro Encounter. So in 2 weeks, we're going to have an episode talking about our favorite final bosses in RPGs. We've actually already recorded that one. There's a sort of a longtime favorite panelist who might make her way back for that one. And we talked about some that maybe you're not expecting. So I thought it turned out to be a really good episode. And so check that out. And then 2 weeks after that, we're going to be talking about that RPG sort of semi-adventure game. But it's really an RPG. Pentiment, the Obsidian game that came out a few years ago. That I'll be honest, I'm about halfway through it, and I absolutely love it. People are always like, "Oh, this game's a lot like Disco Elysium," and I'm like, "No, it's not. This game, while it's not Disco Elysium, still is really, really good. It has a lot in common with it." So I'm excited to chat about that. And then I could go ahead and talk about the game journal we're going to have after that. We're going to be coming back to Persona 5. So we'll be playing Persona 5 Royal, and we'll have 2 episodes on Persona 5 Royal. And then I'll be taking a break for a bit, but I talk more about that on the next episode. So if you want to know why I'll be gone for a couple months, well, you can listen to that one. So if you want to get in touch with us, you can email us retro@rpgfan.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Twitter, X, Blue Sky, Twitch, YouTube. We're all over the place, man. We also have a Discord that you can join. You can chat with some of us there. We also have a shop hosted by TeePublic, selling things like shirts, mugs, things like that. You can find that on our website or just Google it. We also have 2 other podcasts. One is Random Encounter, which is one Monday of every other Monday. It's usually about more modern things, usually the reviews that we've seen more recently. It's usually hosted by Jono, except for occasionally when someone steps in for him. And then the other Monday, every other 2 weeks, is Rhythm Encounter about RPG music, which is usually run by our editor-in-chief, Mike Salvato. If you want to give us feedback, you can leave it on Apple Podcasts, Overcast, YouTube, Spotify, wherever you're listening to us, you can leave us feedback there. We love 5 stars. It really helps us get into more ears, which is good. So let's talk about how to get in touch with the individual panelists, starting with you, Lucas.
Sure. You can follow me on pretty much any social at Raefgall, RAEFGALL. And you can also follow me on YouTube, where I do Let's Plays. And I think when this comes out, I'll still be neck deep in Final Fantasy Tactics.
Yeah, that's a good one. More tactical RPG goodness. And what about you, Audra?
You can catch me at email at audrab@rpgfan.com.
Perfect. And if you want to geek out about Fire Emblem with Ben, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can email me at benloganlove@gmail.com.
Perfect. And if you want to get in touch with me personally, zachw@rpgfan.com is a good email for me. I check it about as often as I check the retro one. And also maybe the fastest way is join our Discord and talk in the podcast channel. And I usually am reasonably responsive there if someone's talking to me directly. So thank you, the three of you, so much again for joining us in this Fire Emblem journey. And maybe you'll come back to the next one as well, I hope, because there will be more, I promise. I know Ben will be there. And thank you, listeners. Good night and good luck.